Hello everybody, this is DH Thorne here. This particular video is going to be the next in the Back to Basics series, and it's going to be talking about Theurgy versus Thaumaturgy. What's the difference? Why does it matter? Should you engage in one or the other or both? And first and foremost, I want to start off by saying that a lot of this information can be found in a lot of places. You can Google these questions. These are also things that are in my books. I don't think that information like this should be behind a paywall. This is why I don't make it specific to my teaching classes. Although if you like what you're experiencing in this video, you might want to sign up for my teaching classes on Patreon. The link is in the description in the Linktree. So information like this is very useful, especially if you're a beginner. But even some people who are advanced may wonder how I differentiate things. Now, there is a difference between Theurgy and Thaumaturgy, and most of the people I talk to have probably never heard of these terms. Theurgy and Thaumaturgy are two different ways of doing magical operation. When I say ways, I don't necessarily mean that one uses one kind of ritual and another uses another kind of ritual. It's two different and distinct ways of approaching magical practice. Now, Theurgy is the one that I like best, so I'll talk about that second. The one I'll talk about first is Thaumaturgy. Now, Thaumaturgy by itself basically means miracle working. So when Jesus would heal the sick, that was Thaumaturgy. When you'd have a magician, supposedly conjure something out of a hat, that would be Thaumaturgy. Not to be confused, of course, with sleight of hand tricks that a stage magician would do. So Thaumaturgy is a kind of miracle working. And Thaumaturgy is really focused on, we'll say, results-based practice. You are doing a spell or ritual for money, for sex, for cursing someone, and it's generally seeking to have validatable experiences that you can point to and say, I did magic and got this result. And some of you may know that I generally oppose a focus on results-based practices. I am not saying that because results don't happen. I'm not saying that because you can't use magic to achieve results. It's that most of the time, I think people misunderstand what those results are and what they mean. In my general principle of spirituality, the results of magic are themselves not a mechanical cause and effect relationship between your behavior and the behavior of the universe as external or separate from yourself, or even as united with yourself. It is not a vending machine. It's not a genie that grants wishes. It is not an engine that if you manipulate right, will go where you want it to go. You yourself, the ego, that is, the person who thinks they're a person, in my worldview of spirituality and metaphysics, and everyone's got one, even people who are anti-dogmatic, they all have something that they behold as the truth. Truth is not dogmatic. Dogmatic is what you believe to be true without any evidence. So people who believe that magic is something that will just get them what they want, they will have success. I'm not denying that in the slightest. The thing is, they will mistake the practice for the result. They will mistake the doing the ritual for the result. They will mistake, I did this and that happened and therefore I caused it. But then if tested, if I say to that same person, repeat the same ritual over and over and over again, and we're going to put you to strict scientific testing requirements, it's not going to pan out for you. You're not going to get the $1 million James Randi Prize. You're never going to prove a supernatural acausal link, because it's acausal, by the way. It literally should be impossible if it's doing it right, between your ritual and the outcome. My personal view of this is we don't do the ritual to cause something to happen. Doing the ritual is something that's happening based on a cause that's actually before even the ritual happened. Your higher self, the highest self, the non-dual self, because I'm a non-dualist, inspires you to do the ritual so that you can have a synchronistic experience of miracle. The ritual doesn't cause it. It sort of encapsulates the future event so that when it happens, you go, whoa, that was really weird that worked out that way. Now, this is why if you go into magic trying to do it on purpose, you will often have dissatisfaction. You'll be frustrated. And of course, some people will say, oh, that's because it's like a science and you've got to be like a scientist and just do it over and over and over again and adjust your methods till it works every time. I've been doing this actively again for over 2.5, 3 years, and I've never encountered someone who can claim that kind of success. And when they do, if I test them, they always fail. This does not, again, mean that magic doesn't work. I have a different opinion. I have a transcendent opinion, I believe, on what magic is. Again, magic is not a system of cause and effect that causes outcomes. It is rather a wrapper for events that causes synchronistic miracles, so that you can say, hey, for some reason, it's almost like I predicted this was going to happen and I did a ritual and it happened. That doesn't mean that the ritual or spell is pointless. See, a nihilistic person will be like, well, what's the point of doing a ritual? No, the point of doing the ritual is the ritual. Is doing the ritual so that you have an encapsulation around the miracle to go, wow, that was incredible. And that is the magic. That moment of mystery, that moment of revelation where you realize that something about you was perfectly aligned with the greater whole in that moment that caused you to want to do a ritual. When I say cause, I mean just as a figure of speech. The reason you were inspired to do the ritual is the same reason you're inspired to be here in the first place and be a living person. You are divinity. You are it. You are the Most High. You are God. You are whatever term you want to give it, Brahman, Atman, Chaos, Soul, whatever you want to call it. You are that having a human experience right now. And that experience will use magic to remind itself of its higher divine self. So what is theurgy? Well, if thaumaturgy is the working of miracles, theurgy is the recognition that you are miracles, the recognition that you are the divine. It is a way to integrate yourself with the divine. Now, if you're a dualist, that means you become more like the external God or become accepted by God. You become saved by that God. You go to that God's heaven, whatever. If you're more of a non-dualist or monist, you recognize the divine within the self and either seek to cultivate that and live that in a more integrated way. Or if you're more like me, you realize that there's nothing to improve. Rather, there is an alignment, an easing, kind of like just leaning into the flow of your own divinity is more like what it's like, to relax the tension rather than cause more tension. So theurgy can take on different forms, just like thaumaturgy can take on different forms and practices. Theurgy can take on different forms and practices. So theurgy really means to integrate with the divine in some way. Now, the divine includes everything from elemental energy to gods to just collective conscious, to everything and anything that has to do with, we'll say, the higher self as a colloquialism. It's not really what it is. It's the true self, really. So when you're doing theurgic magic or however you want to pronounce it, you're doing rituals that will sort of put you in communion with other spirits. You'll be doing necromantic things. You'll be doing channelings. You'll be doing possessions. You'll be doing prayers. You'll be doing pacts with spirits. You'll be doing teaching pacts with spirits, where they teach you magic and ritual, or they teach you, yes, thaumaturgy even. They'll be teaching you things that are useful to you, and really the point is for you to see in yourself that which you think is external. You're really supposed to be making the Baphomet. When I say making the Baphomet, I recognize the Baphomet as the Western yin-yang, or yin-yang, depending on how you like to pronounce that. It is really the union of all opposites. It is really an entity that is fully integrated. It is the human and the animal, the as above and the so below, the solvent coagula as one thing. They both come together in this entity called the Baphomet. So it's not an evil symbol necessarily, although you can pretend it is if you want. It is a symbol of perfect union of nature and humanity and all of those things. It is recognizing the union of all opposites in the whole, that you are the center of the universe no matter where you go. So that's what theurgy does. Theurgy gives you the ability to say, hey, you know what? President Malthus is pretty cool. I want to work with that spirit because it's cool. Now, the reason you think it's cool is either A, because inside yourself you identify something that's like that and you feel a kindred spirit, or B, you go, I don't have those abilities and I want to work with them so that I obtain them or I become like them. In either case, you're practicing theurgy because you're recognizing in yourself something that you think of as external. And the point of the exercise is eventually to narrow the gap, okay, between you and the other, to diminish the illusion of separation until at some point you become President Malthus. At some point you become Yahweh. At some point you become Jesus or Lucifer or whatever spirit you're working with, at least for a moment, at least in some sort of, ritualized way. And the more you do this, the more you can align your egoistic self, which is just an act, it's just a mask, it's not real. The more you can align your activities, your actions as you see them, with that higher thing, with that separate thing that's really still you. So as you bridge that gap, as you destroy the illusion of separation, you become more like them. You'll become more like God, like a living God in the flesh, etc. And then you can potentially have the Luciferian apotheosis that people might practice, or you might have the awakening experience, which is what I prefer, to recognize that you are the divine. That is the point of Theurgy. And Theurgy, I think, holds the key to all other forms of magic. What right do you, as a mere mortal, have to work miracles? There are forms of thaumaturgy whereby you will work with theurgic powers. You will work with celestial spirits. You'll work with celestial forces. You'll work with elemental forces. In other words, you will often work with a spirit to either guide, protect, or even empower what you're doing. So for example, let's say you're using a planetary seal, maybe you're using the seal of Jupiter or something to give you wealth. Well, you're really invoking that celestial force, that personification of Zeus, Jupiter, Marduk. There's a lot of different cultures that have the same character, just a little bit different. That has to do with fertility and wealth and abundance and all of those things. So when you use that seal, you are invoking in the collective conscious, meaning the higher, the theurgic. You're invoking that energy through you, into you, and to manifest in your life. Well, that's really Theurgy. That's not necessarily thaumaturgy, even if you have a miraculous event. Someone who practices chaos magic, specifically something like sigils or something like that, can be said to be doing something a little bit more thaumaturgical. I always get the two words confused in my head, even though I know the difference clearly. They're doing something a little bit more thaumaturgical, because let's say you instead of working with Jupiter or Zeus or something like that for abundance and prosperity and fertility, let's say you're trying to become wealthy, and so instead you create a sigil based on the word wealthy, or I am wealthy, or I have wealth, or I have abundance, or whatever your phrase is going to be. Then you do the little bric-a-brac that turns it into a sigil, or maybe you just create a sigil that represents that flat. Some people just do it that way these days. So you create a sigil and you charge that with your energy and your intention, and then you burn it and release it, and you don't think about it later. That's, in a way, very pure thaumaturgy, and in a way that's a very respectable thing, because the goal ultimately of all forms of magic, be it thaumaturgy or theurgy or anything really, is to eventually cut out all the middlemen and to literally just manifest what you will. Now, this leads into a higher topic, which I'll touch on here, but I've talked about before. I believe that the proper understanding of magic is not cause and effect, which I said before. It is more an act of prescience. It is an act of recognizing what you're already doing and then leaning into that to remove the obstacles. So I've described magic ritual or even spells as if they're all road openers, whether they're causing an effect in something completely separate from you or something in your life, self-help or world-changing or whatever. They're road openers. They're obstacle removers. They're blockage removers. I've jokingly called them X-lax for the soul, because they basically allow you to align with what your higher self is already making happen, getting your egoistic intentions, like in other words, your fake intentions, your desires, we'll say, your fears, your mortal weaknesses, out of the way so that those things can manifest more easily. Now, the secret is, it was probably going to happen already, but when you get in your own way, you suffer a consequence of emotion, like suffering. When you do it with a carefree attitude, you will begin to adjust your own personal guidance, we'll say, your own personal egoistic direction, so that you're less and less in opposition to your higher self. This doesn't mean you're going to have a happier or better or more prosperous life or any of that. It might mean that, there's no guarantees. What it really means is that no matter what happens, you're going to recognize that it was always you doing it from the start, no matter how good or bad it is. That could mean that you are getting hit by a car and go, I needed that experience. It sucks, but I needed it. Someone you love may die. The worst things, as Alan Watts said, you might get the Great Siberian Itch or whatever it is. This was something that you put there for yourself to experience, because that's important for you. That's how you're growing. That's how you're evolving away, we'll say. And I don't love saying it like that, but we'll say it like that for everyone listening. That's how you evolve away from this limited mortal understanding of yourself to a much more beautiful recognition that there is no separation between what you think of as the self and the most distant galaxy in the universe. You're all connected as one. Everywhere you go is the center of the universe, because that's what you are. You are the center of the universe, and the universe is you. And that universe isn't just one, it is a multiverse that is one universe. It is one giant hyperdimensional happening that is timeless and spaceless, and that is what you are, and that is why you have a right to practice magical practices. Not because you have a right to change the world and curse people because you're superior. No, it's because you have a right to recognize that you're doing all of this, the good, the bad, and the ugly. All of it is you. And you have a right, through magical practices, to come to terms with that so that you can eventually have peace and a quality of experience that we'll call blissful, even in the worst moments. So anyway, guys, that is the short answer for those two things. There are other forms of magic that fall into those categories. I consider necromancy to be a style of theurgy. Chaos magic is a style of thaumaturgy. We could say, what would it be? The magic of positive thinking would be a form of thaumaturgy, for example. Working with the Goetia is a form of theurgy. All of these things sort of fit in my book of understanding between those two categories. And there's some overlap. You can work thaumaturgy to get in touch with theurgic powers, or you can do theurgic ritual to learn thaumaturgical skills. Okay, you can call upon President Malphas to destroy your enemy and cause a thaumaturgical result, using theurgy to cause thaumaturgy. My personal preference is always towards theurgy first and foremost, thaumaturgy as a fringe benefit of that. So that's important to recognize. Now, I'll leave you with one final thing, which is, why do I say that necromancy is a form of theurgy, or what is necromancy? There's a lot of different answers on this subject. Some people think it literally just has to do with the dead. The more traditional understanding, to my book learning, which ain't that great understanding, is that necromancy is really the art of working with spirits like theurgy, period. Because the original understanding was that you had the mortal world and the spirit world, and the spirit world was always necromantic in nature. So you could call a person who's a thaumaturgist a necromancer, and they may never once call your dead Aunt Sally to ask about the lost brooch under the bed, right? It's going to be something to do with the spirit. And maybe the higher truth is, every one of these spiritual beings that we work with are probably, at least a lot of them, egregoric entities that are the remainder of a living person who is also an egregore, which I'll have to get that in another video. They're also an egregore that when the body dies, the egregoric self's still there. People think about it, believe in it, talk about it, etc. And it can be deified by enough belief. You have a culture like Egypt where, you know, a pharaoh is called a god, basically, or a son of a god, and this continues throughout, you know, the culture of the Mediterranean and the Middle East and Europe, and India and all these other places where people who were once alive or had an embodied, you know, their avatar lived for a while. When they die, of course, the god is still there, and you can work with that god. Well, that's like a ghost, okay? And that would be a necromantic style of theurgy if you think that way. And there's a lot of people who do, you know, there's a lot of people who think both ways. You know, I think that there's a lot more to it than that, but I don't want to get too off topic here, because then we'll get off into the weeds too much, and you know I love doing that. So that's it for this video, talking about the difference between thaumaturgy and theurgy. And one final thought, you should pick one. Pick one that you want to focus on. I recommend theurgy, of course, but pick one and focus on that, not to the exclusion of the other ever, but focus on the one with the intention of, well, all magic should be self-help. period. Okay? If you're not helping yourself, what's the point? It's just a question of how do you help yourself? Do you make your life easier and therefore weaker? Do you make your life harder and therefore suffer? Or do you somehow find something that enables you to take the good and the bad and recognize that you're doing both, so that when you do give yourself a blessing and a miracle, you can appreciate it and not be angry that the rest of what you want doesn't happen. And when you give yourself a challenge, you recognize that is a blessing that makes you stronger. I'll leave that for you to decide. Anyway, guys, until next time, this is DH Thorne. If you like what I'm doing, you want to subscribe, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit the bell if you want notifications. Check out the link in the link tree if you want to support my work. You can go to Patreon. You can join me for my classes. You can buy my books. You can do all kinds of stuff in there. There's even a Discord server that you can get involved in. So until next time, guys, I'll check you later. And join us every Thursday for our live streams. We always have a good time with Flesh Priest. So until next time, mind the shadows.